Olá, bem-vindos a mais uma conversa do Realidades, desta vez com Marzulli.
O nosso convidado é um consagrado realizador, investigador, autor e palestrante. Autor da saga da Nephilim Trilogy, realizou também a série The Watchers, cujo episódio 7 foi aclamado como o UFO Best Film e também aclamado pelo People's Choice Awards em 2014. Por território nacional, realizou 2 documentários sobre o mistério de Fátima. Liderou ainda uma equipa que procedeu à extração e análise de DNA dos misteriosos crânios alongados encontrados no Peru.
É verdade, vamos dar as boas-vindas ao LA. LA, hi. Thank you so much for being here, for accepting our invitation. LA has been in Portugal for 3 times, 2 for filming 2 different documentaries about Fatima, 1 for a quick visit. We are very close, we have established a good friendship. I have been invited to work with him for the production such he did for Fatima, and another one for another documentary that will be launched in the near future. And so welcome, LA. It's so nice to have you.
Welcome. It's good to see your face again, Francisco, and nice to meet you, Philippe, and great to be here.
Yeah. Well, you have an extensive work in terms of your documentaries, your research. Tell me a little bit about why you started delving into your research and the documentaries. You've worked with Richard Shaw, the late Richard Shaw. Some of our friends have known about his work as well. So let us delve into your work.
Well, it started basically when I was about 40 years old. But before that, I've been a student of the arcane since I was like 13. I'm now 70 years old. Hard to believe. I find it really hard to believe. I'm not yet. But when I was 13, the Beatles came in, and I had left the Catholic Church. I just didn't find anything in it. It just seemed like a lot of ritual, and there was no connection. But I was looking for something. And so I began to study specifically Eastern mysticism and got deeply involved in the occult, Eastern mysticism, spirit guides. I would be deemed or termed a New Ager. That's what I was. I was wound up when I was 20, 21, 20, right around in there. My third eye was opened by Guru Maharaji, by a Mahatma. So I went through all of that initiation. I had spirit guides. I went on vision quests. I mean, I was really looking. I did peyote in a ceremony, to contact the higher spirit guides, that type of stuff. So I spent a lot of time on the other side and became completely disillusioned with everything around 25, 26, and became an agnostic. Didn't want anything to do with anything. Just leave me alone. I'm done. If there is some thing that people call God, I've looked for them. I can't find them. I find a lot of nonsense. And so when I was 30, I was reading some books, and in the back of one of the books by David Hunt, the book was called The Cult Explosion. And all through the book, he talks about all these different paradigms, like silver mind control. For instance, different gurus, just things like that. And I'm reading the book going, yeah, I've tried that, looked into that, read about this, was initiated into that. Most of the book I had actually lived. I was also at Woodstock, and unlike our former president, Bill Clinton, I inhaled as deeply as possible. So for whatever that's worth. So I was completely immersed in that mindset. Then became agnostic. I'm reading The Cult Explosion by Dave Hunt, and in the back is this little prayer to if you've never accepted Jesus as your savior, do that. Now, look, when you say things like that, immediately people go, "Oh my gosh, he said the J word. He's talking about Jesus. Please spare us." I totally get that. I do. I get that. But we're not talking about, religion. We're talking about a relationship. And I was alone in my room. There was no arm twisting. No one's going, either do this or you're going to hell forever. There was nothing like that, right? I just said, look, if you're real, come into my life. That was my prayer. If you're real, come into my life. And he did. And that's 41 years ago. And life has never been the same. There's a phrase I used at the end, I think, of Watchers 9. I look right at the camera and say, if you think you know him, but you don't know him personally, then you don't know him, which is kind of like, an understatement, but it's true. So I became involved in this, everything biblical. I'm a student of biblical eschatology, end time prophecies in particular, and I'm amazed at what I find in that book. And I remember reading in the early days, I would read a couple of chapters. Now, usually I'm stuck on a line for maybe a week, and I'll ponder that or think about it. Right now, I'm looking at the names of God. For instance, El Shaddai means God Almighty. El Elyon means the Most High God. So, and they all have different attributes. This is the kind of stuff you don't hear in churches, and you won't, for the most part. So I was really into prophecy and got into all this, but I had a real problem because as I was reading the Old Testament, you had Noah's flood. And it's like, wait a minute, why is this God of the Old Testament supposed to be loving and kind? Why is he destroying the entire planet except for 8 people? And there's no answer. I mean, I really got angry. And then the Tower of Babel, he's at it again. He's confusing the language. And then after that, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. Now he's going to burn Sodom and Gomorrah. What can be so horrible that he's doing that? Then finally, when the Israelites go and conquer Canaan, the mandate comes to Joshua and Caleb, go and kill everybody, men, women, children, and animals too, burn everything. That was it. I put the book down and walked out of the room. I can't do this. This makes no sense to me, especially a love child from the 60s. It's just like, it just made no sense at all. It's like, how is this possible? Enter a mentor, Dr. I.D.E. Thomas's book, The Omega Conspiracy, which changed my life completely, because it was the first book that dealt with all this, and it opened up the door to what was really going on. Many Christians have no idea who the Nephilim were. And when you get to those passages like Noah, Tower of Babel, destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the conquest of the Holy Land, you sit there and your brain goes, I don't understand what's going on here. And so most people just skip over that and, or say, well, I can't follow a God that does this. Perfect example of that is one of the premier evolutionists of the 20th and 21st century, Richard Dawkins, who quotes those exact passages as going, this so-called God of the Old Testament is pernicious, maniacal. He seems to be favoring one tribe over another, capricious, murderous, genocidal, and he's right, unless something else is going on. Dr. Thomas's book is the book that opened the door to what the Nephilim were, and then I've been studying this now for decades. Dr. Thomas passed away in 2014, and I received my honorary doctorate from him, which I'm really proud of. And we've taken over his work in the sense that we've moved above. If he saw what we have done, he'd be blown away. He'd absolutely be. I think he'd be delighted, because we've proven that there was a Western diaspora thousands of years ago, and they appeared all over. And Francisco, you were part and parcel in that when last time we were in your neck of the woods in Portugal, and then France and in the UK and all of that. I mean, that was an incredible tour with lots of great information. So the bottom line is Dr. Thomas's book talked about the Nephilim. And unless a person understands Genesis 3:15, they don't have no idea what the rest of the guidebook of the supernatural. Most people refer to the Bible as the Bible, and I do too, but Bible just means book. What it really is, when a person plumbs the depths of it, it's a guidebook to the supernatural. It tells you how to interface with it, what's good, what's not good. It just the rules of encounters, the rules of engagement, it's all of that. But throughout its pages from Genesis 3:15 to the last book, the book of Revelation, it talks about this seed war. This is what Genesis 3:15. And so you've got these characters and a scene. You've got Adam and Eve over here, the dragon or the serpent, and then you've got what I believe is the pre-incarnate Christ. He looks at them and he points to the dragon and goes, "Your seed, your offspring, will be at war and enmity with the offspring of the woman. He, someone coming from the seed of the woman, will crush your head. You will bruise his heel." Well, that sets up the rest of the entire biblical narrative. Someone's going to come that's going to take the dragon's kingdom from him. When was the last time you heard a sermon on this? Most people listening to this show, you've never heard any of this. And yet it's there in plain sight. Remember, the Bible was locked up, chained to the pulpit for 1,000 years. Just remember that. And until the Reformation, people couldn't read it under penalty of death. So, why is that? Why is that? So much of this was completely lost, specifically in the 1,000 years of what is termed as the Dark Ages. So that sets up the rest of the narrative. And 3 chapters later, we read in Genesis 6, the sons of God saw the women of earth, that they were beautiful, and they took wives from whomever they chose and went into them in the biblical sense and had children by them. These were the Nephilim. These were the men of renown. And then when you read the pseudepigraphical book, the book of Enoch, which is not found in the biblical canon, although certain, like for instance, the Ethiopian Bible has the book of Enoch preceding the book of Genesis. So it's also quoted in the New Testament by Jude. All that to say this, that unless a person understands the seed war that is going on in antiquity, they don't understand what's going on in modernity. And I'll leapfrog with the UFO abductions, because in my opinion, they dovetail together perfectly. Because Jesus warns us it'll be like the days of Noah when he returns. Now that's a prophecy 2,000 years ago, but immediately it calls to one's attention what differentiates the days of Noah than any other time in history. And it's the presence of these intruders, these fallen angelic entities who are extremely powerful, but have a very nefarious agenda. And this is why what happened in antiquity is now happening in modernity. And that's why I believe in a kind of a unified theory for all of us. So even though I talk about the Nephilim, I can jump right into the UFO phenomenon and why I think it has a nefarious agenda.
You point out several times that you were also inspired by the work of Jacques Vallée. In what way did he inspire you, or inspire your work?
Well, you could call Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek the fathers of modern day UFO. Ufology. They certainly, he was, as many people know, the caricature in Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind is modeled after Dr. Jacques Vallée. So, reading his books, and he believed, as I do, messengers of deception. He believes that there's a nefarious agenda, that they lie and do so habitually. And that's from my perspective, having, like you, I've been involved in this for decades. And I just believe that there is a very, very nefarious, dark agenda that's happening. I know Dr. David Jacob, who's no longer on the scene, but his last book, Walking Among Us, talked about the hybrid entities. In our film, which is free, you can go to YouTube, because you're not going to buy the hard copy in Portugal. It'll cost you $80 to get there. But you can go to our YouTube channel, LA Marzulli, or just go to streaming, like a stream, streaming.lamarzulli.net. Download it.
We will put the link in the description.
Yeah, and it's an hour long. It's got tons of information. Hybrids are real. They are walking amongst us. The guy that Al Matthews, who we interviewed in the film, who becomes the centerpiece of that film, had an encounter with what can only be called or termed or deemed as a hybrid female. I mean, that's what she was. And the eyes shape-shifted. There was all sorts of high strangeness, as J. Allen Hynek would say, all sorts of high strangeness around that encounter. So both of those men influenced me greatly. Dr. Thomas, on the other hand, put the cherry on the sundae.
Would you put everything related to UFOs in the nefarious way?
It's complex, as you would say. It's complex. When you look at the biblical narrative, there seems to be angelic forces, the good guys, using the same craft or craft that's similar. And this is where it can go off the rails for a lot of people, because it's like, well, wait a minute, what are these chariots of fire that Elisha's servant Gehazi is seeing? The story is basically this: they're after Elisha, the prophet, and they're surrounded by the Syrian army, like 180,000 Syrians that they're going to go into the city and take Elisha and kill him. And so Elisha goes, hey, Gehazi's freaking out, the servant, and Elisha's prayer is, Lord, open his eyes. Because obviously Elisha's already seeing this. So Gehazi goes out, the Lord opens up his eyes, and he says, I saw the chariots of fire that were above, surrounding and above. Well, what are the chariots of fire? Well, we don't know, but we can speculate that this guy has nothing in his grid system at all for something that is shining, something that's there, something that's aerial. He's never seen anything like it. Just like in Leapfrog over to Fatima, most of the people, the 80,000 people, upwards of 80,000 people standing in that field, had never seen any type of aerial phenomenon in any way, shape, or form, not even a dirigible. So there's nothing in their grid which braces them for this disc-like spinning object in the sky. I looked up and saw a dull silver disc. Well, what does that sound like? And, Francisco, you and I have talked about this endlessly, and that's what our two films are about, which I really want to go back and re-edit. And when I get some time in my hands, I probably will. But, I just think that most of what we see, most of it, not all of it, but most of it, I think is from the other side. There are encounters like Gary Stearman, very close friend, who flew one. He was in a plane, and all of a sudden he lost electrical power. The fan belt broke or whatever, and he flew for 3 hours. He had missing time, but he was conscious the whole time. He wasn't taken. But this voice happened in the cockpit. If you look to your left, you'll see a UFO. And he looks to his left, and about a mile away is a disc-like object. And all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, it goes like this, right next to his plane. And he travels next to this thing for him, it's like minutes, but when he gets on the ground, it's hours. Time, space-time displacement, very common. He said it was the most beautiful thing he ever saw, and that this craft basically saved his life. So it's, Francisco, I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. But I have, when I'm speaking at a UFO conference, I'll look at the audience and I say, how many of you think it's okay to abduct a 5-year-old boy or girl against their parents' wishes, take them sexually, not experiment, but do some sort of a gynecological or other examination on them, depending on whether they're male or female, obviously, and then implant them? How many think that's okay? Not a hand ever goes up. Not one hand ever goes up. And I go, you've just proven my point. Where that there's a side of this which is very dark, very nefarious.
What would you say to people like Stephen Greer, who, for him, all UFOs are benevolent and we should not be afraid of them?
Well, why would they have to do the same ridiculous examinations over and over and over again? Both Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek, stated this. It's absurd. I mean, surely people that have this kind of advanced technology don't need to be doing the same barbaric examinations on human beings endlessly repeated. It's just absurd. But, people, they get cognitive dissonance. Well, they're just above us, so I guess they have a reason for doing it. Yeah, they live off the fear.
You don't give credit to the contactees, the people that tell the story of or encounters with these Nordic or human-looking beings that have a message of love, etc. So where do you fit this with your perspective?
Well, again, it's a mixed bag. If they are messengers of deception, then what is this love that they're talking about? And why is it, and I wrote about this in my very first book, Nephilim, which was a fictional, there's 3 books in that trilogy, Nephilim trilogy. Why come here and tell us that Jesus wasn't God? And we know that that's not a lot, but some abductees talk about that. That the first thing that comes out of their mouth is like, well, Jesus wasn't God. And my answer to that is, why fly, so-called millions of miles to tell us that? I mean, why not give us the cure to cancer? Why not do something that we can all benefit from? But they go after Jesus as not being God. There's also tales of the crucifixion, holographic films of the crucifixion, also the resurrection. Abductees that I've talked to.
But usually contactees do not tell those type of stories, encounters with Jesus, or do they?
It depends on who you read. It depends on who you talk to. I agree. Not everyone has that, but certain people have had that, and that's why.
Wouldn't then be the hypothesis that some of these contacts are with those interdimensional or demonic beings, and others being other type of beings, eventually even extraterrestrial? Do you fit all the whole experience in one perspective only, or do you accept that there may be different beings interacting?
Well, I would default to Fermi's paradox, which tells us that with all these planets out there, we're not hearing a whole lot of anything. So that's bizarre that we're not, and yet we know that contact has happened for thousands of years and continues to do so. When you look at and you and I have talked about this, not on this show, but privately and stuff. I remember when I was in the New Age, I ran down and got that book and read it in one sitting and believed every word in it. Then he became this born-again, spirit-filled Christian. And I was reading the book of Enoch about 10 years after that, or more like 15 years after that, after reading UFO Contact from the Pleiades. It's circa 1990. There is no internet. I mean, not as we know it today, 1990. Yeah. And I have Dr. Thomas's book, and he's quoting the book of Enoch. Well, I couldn't hop online and download R.H. Charles's copy. That's not the way things work. So I went to a bookstore, and like 3 weeks later, I ordered it, but they didn't have it because it was at that time the Book of Enoch was, not a bestseller and certainly not on the bookshelves. So it took about 3 weeks to get that. And I remember reading it, and I'm not saying I'm the first person to put this together, but I might have been. because I was in both camps. And in the book of Enoch, it talks about these 200 watcher angels which descend on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. This was right before the flood, like maybe 500 years before the Great Flood, if you believe in that. And of course I do. But because every culture on the planet has some sort of a flood story or flood legend. So the ringleader's name is Semyazi. I mean, that's the ringleader in the book of Enoch is Semyazi. And this entity that appears to Edward Billy Meyer is the same name, basically. So I just sat there. I remember showing that to Dr. Thomas with both books, and he just dropped the books on his lap and stared at me with his jaw on the ground. It's like, could it be that it's the same entity? We don't know. We have no idea, but it could be. And linguistically, it's certainly there. But I find it interesting, circling back to Meyer, that, and this proves my point, when you read his book, immediately they go after the God of the Bible, not in so many words, but that's what they do. They just immediately steer you in another direction. And so, why are they doing that? I just find it interesting. Look, nobody's got all the answers. I don't either. And I don't profess to have all the answers. I have my belief after studying it for 30 years or longer, because I've seen two, one when I was 12 and the other one when I was in my 50s. And the one at 12 had an incredible, profound impact on my life. It really did. So I just know that I call it the coming great deception, because when they show up, everything is going to change instantly on the planet. And the question is, the book of Revelation tells us this, and this is my wheelhouse. This is my wheelhouse. Book of Revelation tells us something very enigmatic. Most people will look at that and say, well, that can't possibly be literal, written almost 2,000 years ago. It says that no one in the latter days, the end of days, the end times, under the rule of the Antichrist, the anti-Messiah, the one in place instead of Messiah, will be able to buy, sell, or trade. Now, you can go there and you can read it for yourself in the book of Revelation. No one will be able to buy, sell, or trade without this mark. Well, for thousands of years, people would read that and go, well, that's got to be hyperbole, because that'll never happen. How is that going to be possible? And yet we find ourselves in the 21st century where that is all too, possible, very possible. And people, in fact, are getting chips they just go like this to the conductor, and conductor sees the chip on the train, and they're good to go. But that's not the mark of the beast. That's not what I'm talking about. It's something else. And then when you dig deeper into what this mark is, it's a DNA changer. It changes the host's DNA, so they're no longer human. Now that's not conjecture. Other researchers in my study the way I do, or have that same type of worldview, biblical worldview, believe it also. Doug Hamp wrote a book called Corrupting the Image, and he also feels that that's what it will be. So when I started talking about this 20 years ago, people laughed at me, because I had met Dr. Roger Lear, and he had taken out his first implant circa 1999. And I remember meeting him at a UFO conference where there was about maybe 50, 60 people, and someone introduced me to Roger, and we became fast friends, and he's in all of our Watchers films, by the way. And I looked at Roger and I said, Roger, I've heard you've taken out the implant from somebody. He goes, well, you like to see it? And I go, yeah, sure. And he goes, well, here it is. And he reaches into his coat pocket and he pulls out this little plastic vial and jiggles it like this. And I'm just going like, he goes, hold out your hand. I hold out my hand, and he drops the little implant. And I'm just going, here I am holding something, technology that might be from another world. It was just like, twang. And so we became, good friends. We used to go out to lunch once a month. He was in all of our Watchers films. He passed away. Rick and I were at his funeral. The last time I ever saw him alive was when we were at SEAL Lab. True story. Okay. We had taken out, and I could get nasty here, but I won't. I'll be nice and just avoid that whole part. But we had taken out how someone stole our film, but we won't go there. So we'll just leave that as it is. So we have this guy by the name of Bill, not his real name, and Bill told us that he'd be abducted when he was 5 years old and implanted. So we took him to Roger. First thing is that we show us all this in the film in our Watcher series. There's the implant below the leg, okay, below the knee. It's plain as day. There it is. There's the implant. We did a CAT scan. There's the implant. We did a Gauss meter. There's the implant. We did all the protocols that Dr. Roger Lear had in place because he was the doctor and he had done this. This was number 17, the last one he took out before he passed away. So we did all this. Now we take him to Dr. Matriciana, and Matriciana takes the wand of the ultrasound and goes like this and finds it within, 10 seconds. Because we'll see in 2 weeks, we'll take it out. 2 weeks goes by, we're in the operating theater. There's 3 camera crews. Rick and I are running around. There's 15 people roughly in another room watching the proceedings on a big HD monitor. Dr. Roger Lear is there. Dr. Matriciana is there. Nurses and staff, and it's just a whole bevy of activity running around. And I'm looking at my watch going, oh, we'll have this thing out in 20 minutes. We'll go to an early lunch. Always thinking of my next meal. And so Dr. Matriciana starts the proceedings and he can't find it. He goes over, we look at the x-ray. We know where it is. He puts a little X where he thinks it is, right? And can't find it. He goes over a little strip of flesh, like maybe 8 inches long, 4 inches wide, below the guy's knee for an hour and 10 minutes. Okay? Now, this is where I'm going to get woo-woo on you guys, okay? Because now we're going to jump off into the supernatural world, which a lot of you know about, but, this is what I believe and this is what I travel on. So I get a tap on my shoulder from my spirit guide, but it's not who you think it is. But I use that term because people will accept that. But it literally, that's who he is. I get a tap on the shoulder from my spirit guide who speaks to me, not in an audible voice, but he says to me, you need to take authority over this and you need to do it now. You need to pray. So I'm in a room full of people that don't believe like I do. I don't ask permission. I just take authority over it. And I go, guys, I'm going to pray and I'm going to do it now. And my prayer is very simple. Father, if there are forces which are cloaking this device, I pray that you would break their power and do it soon. Within a minute, the implant comes up on the ultrasound machine monitor like this. Meow. Just like without the sound effect. All of a sudden, there's the implant, and everybody goes, what's that? And Matriciana goes, that's the implant. Matriciana takes the ultrasound wand, taps it, looks at it like this, taps it again, puts it on his leg, there's the implant. He does this about a half a dozen times. He can't figure out why all of a sudden everything's working where 2 minutes before it wasn't. So Monday, that's a Saturday, we take the implant out. It's all on film. Ours was one of the first teams ever to extract it, and the thing was being cloaked. They knew what's chilling about this. They knew exactly what we were up to, and they didn't want this thing to come out. So following Monday, so it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, we're at SEAL Lab looking at this thing under a scanning electron microscope. This is hard science. This is why we do what we do. We're on just like you do with the fibers coming down. It's, this isn't speculation, and we found some very interesting properties from this implant. So I go, hey, Roger Lear, can I talk to you outside for a minute privately? And Dr. Lear goes, yeah, sure. So I take him outside and I go, I hope you realize what happened in an operating theater. Francisco, his eyes got really big, and he goes, LA, this is his words, I'm quoting directly, LA, I now believe there's a supernatural component to the UFO phenomenon, and I'm going to tell Whitley Strieber about that. He was supposed to talk to Whitley about it. Whether he did or not, I don't know. I don't think he ever had a chance to. But that operating theater with him in there changed his paradigm. Look, Roger was the kind of guy, he's Jewish. So he looked at me as a born again Christian and he would try to zing me and he'd go, well, what about nuns that kill their babies? And I'd look at him and go, well, Roger, that's indefensible. Oh, okay. And he'd go back in his pastrami sandwich. I mean, it's just like, that was the relationship. And so that incident, because he was involved in it, and he saw, A plus B equals C. He saw the prayer. All of a sudden, there it is. And Richard Shaw and I, who's also a Christian, we're just laughing, we're just cracking up because we know what's happened. We know that he's shown up. Our spirit guides have done it. So it's we didn't change his paradigm, but the incident changed his paradigm.
Okay, Philippe.
Mr. Marzulli, I'm so glad to have you on our show. You have studied and analyzed so many topics into the realms of ufology and the so-called forbidden archaeology that it was a challenge to find the starting point for this conversation. However, one of the topics that our community wants to hear about, myself included, are the mysterious elongated skulls found in Caracas, Peru. So let's start from there and see where the conversation takes us. In the past few days, I have conducted on Facebook an opinion poll about this topic in 2 different Facebook groups, and two of the options got a balanced percentage. Option 1, it indicates the possibility of another species have somehow interacted with the human race on a distant past. And the other option, quite voted as well, it was the result of cranial deformation or head binding for cultural reasons. Can you share your opinion about these skulls? And can you please share with us, did you have a previous opinion before the DNA studies and changed your opinion, or you always had the same opinion about it?
Well, when I first saw these, someone sent me a YouTube by Brian Forrester, who was at Senior Juan's Museum in Paracas, Peru. And I remember seeing that and contacting Brian, and that was our first trip down in 2013. And I remember Brian, was the guy that put this on the map, but Senior Juan was the guy that had been collecting these things for decades. So that's the chain of custody, if I can use that term. So when I saw this, I had already written books and talked about the Nephilim. The three novels had already been published, the Nephilim trilogy. So I was deep into it already. The hypothesis, before we even went down there, was this, and this has led to the entire series of On the Trail of the Nephilim, this hypothesis, that when Joshua and Caleb pressed the conquest of the Promised Land about 3,500 years ago, there was a diaspora, there was a migration, specifically westward, but they also could have gone, down and out the back door, sort of out the Pacific Ocean way. So there's lots of ways to escape, but that was the hypothesis. And if that's true, then we should see vestiges, remains of their handiwork. Well, we do, in my opinion. It's all over the place. Francisco knows exactly what I think. When we went to Karnak, when we went to Salisbury Hill and the plane and everything else, this was all, in my opinion, Nephilim architecture, fallen angel technology. That's the hypothesis. So now we have, and that's scientific. So we believe that these entities these elongated enigmatic skulls that we find in Peru. It's always good to have show and tell. And this is a model. It's not the real thing, but it's a one-to-one model. And you can look at this and we'll talk about it and we'll go through it. So when we went down there in 2013, we knew something was up, but we didn't know what we know now, coming on, 2022. It's almost a decade. It'll be 9 years this January. It's hard to believe that much time has gone by. Senior Juan has passed away. Richard Shaw has passed away. So it's very sobering in that respect. So when we went down, we realized that there was the standard archaeological explanation that these skulls were all the result of cranial deformation or cranial head binding. That's when you take a skull of an infant and you bind it and you can shake the head. You'll get no argument from me. That's certainly a practice which is not only done in South America, but also in the Americas. My work out on Catalina Island, we discovered elongated skulls that no one had seen. Nobody even had seen these. We discovered them in a cache of records hidden away in a museum box. And we published them in my book, On the Trail of a Nephilim. We also found a giant over about 9 feet tall. We also found skeletons with 6 fingers, which go back to the biblical narrative. So there's a phrase I use often. There is a hidden history which has been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. So why are they so adamant about this? What are they so afraid of? Why are all these skulls the result of cranial deformation? We maintain some of them are, but not all of them. And it becomes very clear after we specifically the DNA, but also in our film, On the Trail of a Nephilim series, it's number 6, DNA, the final result. Our team was the only team heretofore, to the best of my knowledge, that's actually done this. Now, I know since we did this in 2015, 2016, other teams have gone down, but we don't know what their findings are. They haven't published it. We published ours. We did a press conference with it. It's also in the film, and you can download that by going to streaming.lamarzulli.net and watch it for pennies on the dollar. And you can see all this information. So we went and we looked at these, and we brought in doctors and chiropractors, surgeons, optometrists, archaeologists, anthropologists, multi-discipline study. So it's just not L.A. Marzulli, who's not an archaeologist or a medical doctor. I mean, I'm kind of running the show, but I'm bringing in all these people who do know about human anatomy, and I'm learning as we go. When I got down there, I had no idea what a sagittal suture was. Now it's rolls off my tongue because I talk about it all the time. So we realized that there were certain anomalies, structural anomalies in the skull, in many of the skulls, but we didn't realize what we were up against until Joe Taylor started making the models, and then we were able to get the models to one of an anthropologist who wanted to join the team. And it was the work of Rick Woodward, our team's lead anthropologist. This is his work. Nobody else saw this. No one, do you realize that these skulls have been handled by lots and lots of people over the years? Nobody ever saw this because they weren't thinking the way a medical doctor would think. Rick was thinking that way. If you look here in the back of the skull, this is the foramen magnum right here. It's where the spinal column attaches to the skull. Now, it should be, let's see if I can get this dowel out here so I have something to point with. Give me a second. It should be where it should be here. So there it is. This is the foramen magnum right here, okay? It's all the way to the posterior of the skull, all the way to the occipital plate. Well, you can't cradle headboard or deform the skull to move the position of the foramen magnum. That foramen magnum should be here, should be right here. And that way you would balance the skull. the skull would be centered right over that spinal column, which, by the way, your skull is and my skull is. This skull is all the way in the back. In fact, in some of the skulls, you can see it like right here. If it's any further back, it's outside the skull. Now, our team was the only team when we went to collect the DNA samples at the Ekipa Museum. They had the very elongated, the Chongo skull, which is all over the internet. Our team was the only team, the first team, to take it out and photograph where the placement of the foramen magnum is. That foramen magnum on the Chongo skull is so far to the occipital plate. This is the occipital plate right here, the rear of the skull. It's so far in the back that if it's any further, it's outside the skull. And when the woman goes like this, she's holding the skull like this, and you hear Mando Gonzalez, our lead archaeologist, tell her in Spanish, turn the skull over. So she turns it over like this. It's all on film. Richard Shaw's got the camera, and you hear me go, oh my God, it's all the way in the back, talking about this. At that point, we knew what to look for. We knew what to look for. Of course, there was no sagittal suture. You should have, this is a suture. This is the frontal suture. Look at the frontal bone. Look how massive it is, how elongated it is. And then there's no sagittal suture. This suture should come here and split the parietal plate in two parts. It doesn't. So there's a disease called craniosynostosis, which usually happens in elder people. And what it does is it closes that suture. But guess what? There's not a vestige of it. It's like it was never here. What's more important, why is it that many, if not all, of the elongated skulls that are not cradle headboarded found in Peru have an absence of a sagittal suture? Why? I mean, it's like way off the charts. So we're looking, when you start adding all this stuff up, and I'll add it up, there's the position of the foramen magnum, the lack of a sagittal suture, the massive zygomatic arch, which is right here, massive zygomatic arch, very, very robust. The fact, this came from our optometrist, Dr. Jeff Duff, these eye sockets here are 25 to 30% larger than a human being's. You can change the shape, but you can't change the size through cranial deformation. You can't do it. You can't push the foramen magnum to the back of a skull. That's done in utero. And it should be here, and it's here. It should be here. That's genetic. So you've got genetic anomalies, no sagittal suture, foramen magnum all the way to the back. Very, very robust zygomatic arch.
But comparing to other elongated skulls that you found there, do you found the same characteristics? For instance, comparing to the ones that you think are indeed elongated skulls, do you find those human characteristics there?
In the ones that we believe are not the result of cradle headboarding, there are genetic anomalies, like I just pointed out. The dead giveaway is the foramen magnum. If the foramen magnum is in the center of the skull, then it's not.
But on the other skulls that are human but are elongated, you find the foraminal here in the middle, right?
In the ones that are cradle headboarded, the ones that are artificially done, the foramen magnum is always in the center, never moved.
And you have the sagittal.
And many times the sagittal suture is there. So those are just some dead giveaways. But the other thing is the pupillary distance. It's in a normal human being, the pupil distance, the distance between the pupils is about 65 millimeters. These are about 45 millimeters. So our optometrist on our team, Dr. Jeff Duff, posited that what we may be looking at here is that these entities may have had night vision. Now, last time I was in Peru, which was 2019, all right, I was down there, and Wrinkles, what are you doing? My dog's next to me, chewing a bone, of course. And we were such a ham. And A Peruvian archaeologist took us way, way out to the reserve. The public's not allowed to go there, okay? Way out in the reserve. And he showed us the remains of one of their houses, 3,000 years old, from the Paracas people. It was underground. There was a chimney that went down. So they would climb down this chimney, which in itself is really bizarre because it's overlooking this beautiful bay on the Pacific Ocean. Why would you want to live underground when you've got that view? And I said, well, how did they see down there? Did you find vestiges of torchlight? He says, no, that's part of the problem. And when we showed this skull to our optometrist, Dr. Jeff Duff, who posited, without knowing about the dwelling, he came up with, well, they might have been cave dwellers and they might have had the ability to see in the dark. So the other thing is our team with the DNA, we took 58 samples, okay, from 18 different skulls, 9 from the Ica Museum, 9 from Senior Juan's Museum. And many of them showed a Middle Eastern haplogroup, Eastern European haplogroup, mitochondrial DNA coming from the maternal side of the equation. We've never been able to get nuclear DNA, never. Now, the other thing is, if it's non-human, it might not even, they don't even know what to look for, right? So we don't know what we're looking at. So it's inconclusive at best. Do I think it's Nephilim? All day long. But that's my wheelhouse. That's my hypothesis. That's my paradigm and worldview. That's all the evidence so far seems to me, because the Paracas people show up in Paracas about 3,500 years ago, which coincides precisely with the conquest of Canaan. And the haplogroups show that they come from the Middle East or Eastern European, mitochondrial DNA from the maternal line. So, I mean, you've got hardcore scientific physical evidence that points to a Middle Eastern connection or a Levant connection on some level. Surely we can't overlook that, but academia does. They don't want any part of it. Oh, it's all contaminated. And this is what you're dealt with. Anything that goes against the prevailing paradigm is immediately, you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh, the DNA was all contaminated. Well, if it was all contaminated, why didn't we find nuclear DNA? If we contaminated it, then where's the nuclear DNA? There isn't any. Why?
It happens the same thing with the Star Child skull, right?
We had nothing to do with the Star Child skull. And I know Chase Klotsky did a bunch of DNA testing on that. I was not privy to the results, so I have no idea. I know that a lot of people thought that what Lloyd Pye had done with that was disingenuous, but he's not here to defend himself, so we don't know. Apparently Chase Klotsky got the skull. She did extensive DNA testing on it, and it showed to be human. We have not been able to get the nuclear DNA from any of these, except, according to Brian Forrester, there was a UK film crew that came in. They took illegally out of the country, but no one cares. They make a big deal about it, but nobody cares. I mean, the places, don't get me going on that. But they did testing on it, and they did get nuclear DNA. I mean, nuclear DNA was from an unknown primate. That's all they could match it to, unknown primate, which is kind of what we'd expect to see, an unknown primate, because it's not in the database. We have no idea what it would be. So is this fallen angel technology DNA? I don't know. I just know that so far, everything in our hypothesis has proven to be true. That our hypothesis that these are Nephilim tribes from the Levant that fled 3,500 years ago when Joshua and Caleb pressed the conquest. And remember, that's what people don't understand about Genesis 3:15, if I can circle back to that. So you say, well, why does a loving God allow the killing of men, women, children, and animals? Because we were looking at genetic manipulation that was never supposed to take place in the Levant. The Nephilim were there in the Levant, in the Promised Land. And that's why that mandate, because they're not human. They are the soulless ones. And they're not, this goes back to Genesis 3:15.
And why would they be traveling to that zone in South America?
The trade winds will carry them there, which is amazing. Thor Heyerdahl proved that. We show that in the film. Thor Heyerdahl proved that with his not
so,
only
and the locals basically try to elongate their skulls to copy what they were seeing.
That's what I think, and we don't know the kind of mental capacity that these guys might have had. We just don't know. I mean, there was one place, Francisco and Felipe, that we went to, which was really weird. It's one of the strangest places I've ever been. It's probably no longer there. And this is how archaeology is done in Peru, okay? There was a killing field. And when Senior Juan took us there, it was very disturbing because we counted at least 60 skulls, which had the front of their head bashed in by like a war club. They were all elongated. It was on a high place. There was not one funerary object in the mass grave, not one. So it was not a place of honor. It was a killing field. And, you know, I had a forensic anthropologist lined up to come down and investigate it. The last minute he pulls out. Why? Because he's afraid he'll be ridiculed. It's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. You know, if you're in academia, you've got to toe the party line if you want your job next year. You know, you gotta toe the party line. Just like if you're a museum curator or if you're a head of a museum, you toe the party line. You don't start talking about, you know, supernatural beings or anything like that. That's how you get fired. But see, I can, and I go where the science leads me. If the science had come back and said, nope, it's all Native American LA, no Middle Eastern connection here at all, fine, we'll all go home. If there were no genetic anomalies in the skulls, if, in other words, if we show them to surgeons and doctors and chiropractors and all this archaeologists and anthropologists who are going genetic, and it's in the film, they all say this. We are looking at something genetic happening here. It's a genetic anomaly. It's not the result of cranial deformation. If we didn't hear that, if it wasn't there, that's it. We would have reported on that, and we all go home and go on with something else, like we did with the goofy fairy that Jaime Maussan gave us. We all thought it was real. The two DNA people down in Mexico thought it was real. The people that examined it in Mexico thought it was real. We thought it was real. I took the x-ray to a veterinarian in the United States. He looked at it and said, well, look at these this must be buckshot. This thing was shot out of the sky. And we went with it. In the book, it says, as of the publication, I believe the fairy is real. However, more testing needs to be done. So about 3 or 4 months after the book was published, more testing happened. Jaime Maussan was able to get the thing out of Mexico, and we got it, all right? And we had 2 veterinarians on a Saturday afternoon, had the whole place to ourselves. 2 veterinarians are there. We take the thing out of the jar. We put it on a plastic tray. We x-ray it. Immediately, one of the vets goes, something's wrong with this. It doesn't look right. And I go, well, yeah, what do you want? Look at all the buckshot in the pelvis area. The thing got blasted out of the sky. And he goes, yeah, I get that, but something doesn't look right. So like an hour goes by and this thing's laying, remember, it's been immersed in a solution to preserve it. So now it's exposed to the air for an hour and things begin to pop out that we didn't see before. I'll never forget it. I take the forceps and I reach down and I go, hey, what the heck does this look like? And I pick up this thing and I hold it up in front of the doc's face. And he goes, that looks like a matchstick with epoxy on it. We go back over to the x-ray. We blow up that section. Sure enough, we can see it's a matchstick with epoxy. So we immediately went public with it because that's what you do. As a researcher, you tell the truth. You go where the science leads. And we were going where the science leads. That Wednesday, this was a Saturday, Wednesday we're up at Santa Barbara with a zoologist who completely took the thing apart, deconstructed it all on film, That's a free film for you to watch. So all I'm saying is this: if the DNA had come back and it showed that there's nothing to see here, then that's what we would have reported. If all these medical professionals, doctors, and everyone would have said, no, this is the result of cranial deformation, then that's what we would have reported. But we have people that are saying, wait a minute, look at the DNA, look at the foramen magnum, look at the eye sockets. Come on, something else is going on here.
Okay. Philip?
Are some of those skulls available to be visited in the museum?
Wait, say that again. Some of the skulls, what in the museum?
If we can visit some of those skulls at the museum, the ones with special characteristics, are they available to be seen?
There are some elongated skulls. Well, the Chongo skull is still in the Ica Museum. And that, in my opinion, there's no way that that's a human. There's no way, in my opinion, that Chongo skull is a human being. And I just outlined all the reasons why. We examined that skull. That foramen magnum was so far back to the occipital plate. If it's any further back, it's outside the skull. So, and you can't crush the back of the skull. You can't do that and bring it to the foramen magnum. You just can't do that. And I'll show you once again, because people go, oh, I wish you would have showed me that one more time. Ugh. So I will. I'll show it to you again. This is where it should be. There's the foramen magnum. It should be here. It should be in the middle of the skull. We've got if you want to see medical doctors say this exact thing, go to our website, streaming.lamarzulli.net, download number 6, costs you like $4 or $5. I don't know what that is in Portuguese or euros, but whatever it is, it's nothing. It's nothing. I mean, you spend more on that on a cup of stinking coffee, for crying out loud. And you can watch you can watch the experts. And these are people that are, they're all lettered. They're experts in their field. They look at this thing and they all say it's genetic. Whatever this is, it's genetic. So that's what I'm going with. I'm going by what the experts say.
You told us about a giant skeleton. Is that common to find? And is there some place to be seen? Because usually at the Facebook we see some pictures, but we're never able to know if it's legit or not. So you had access to those?
I have access to one photograph that I discovered out on Catalina Island. The backstory on that was there was a researcher, archaeologist by the name of Ralph Glidden, who conducted very primitive archaeological digs circa 1919 to 1921 by the Hay Museum. The Hay was later gobbled up by the Smithsonian. He reported unearthing 9-foot skeletons. Everybody, modern day archaeologists, look at that as a ruse. So I got wind from a friend that they had discovered a cache of records by Ralph Glidden that had been missing for like decades, 40, 50 years. So I called the museum and I asked if I could come out. They initially said no. They kept on saying no until I offered a $1,000 donation to their new museum. The doors flew open. So I went out there. Francisco's laughing. So I went out there and I sat down with John Borgina, who was fired shortly after my book was published, which showed the pictures from the museum. That's another story. And I said, John, come here, take a look at this. So he had brought out these museum boxes. Everything had been gone through, put in manila envelopes. And he says, LA, what do you want to look at first? I go, let me see the pictures. So he goes out and gets the museum boxes and sit down. Half an hour goes by. I go, John, come here, look at this. What do you see here? Elongated skulls. I go, that shouldn't be here. I go, what about this pic? Count the fingers. It's a skeleton with 6 fingers, huge skull. And we later analyzed that based on the dish, the abalone shell next to him. We believe the size of a skull, that was also a 9-footer. But the smoking gun of all this was Ralph Glidden standing in a recently excavated grave, holding on to his shovel. And in front of him, in situ, not a disarticulated bone pile, is in situ a skeleton. We had 3 different researchers analyze the picture. There was no collusion between the 3 of them till they gave me their results. Then I was online with Skype. I Skyped them all in and we had a field day. They talked to each other because they all use different disciplines to ascertain the skeleton's height, right around 9 feet. Well, that rewrites history. So we published that in my book, On the Trail of the Nephilim. And we went back to the Island Museum 6 months later, where they had taken the picture, blown it up on the wall. The picture was a little 5x7 black and white, the one that I photographed. And there's no way that's the real deal. There's no way that's photoshopped in any way. That's the real deal. You're looking at a 9-footer. So the museum takes it and they blow it up, and it's on the wall, except that they've cropped the giant out of the picture. They've cropped the giant out of the picture. And I'm going to see if I can pull it up here. There's a shot. Let me just see. Maybe not. Hold on, give me a second.
Is it this one?
No, it's not that one. No, it's not. That might be a ruse also, but we don't know.
This is, remember when we were with Hugh Newman? This was his book.
Yeah, incredible. Let me see here. Is they took the picture and they cropped the giant out of the picture. They cropped, it's not there. So right off the bat, they're being disingenuous. They show.
I remember you talking about that when you were here in Portugal in 2019. I remember you talking about that. And I think you showed the picture.
Do you have that book, On the Trail of the Nephilim? You don't have that book, do you?
No.
Wow. Anyway, I mean, and so we went there and we took my book and put my book below the picture and we filmed there showing that, and I went to the new curator and I said, why did you guys do this? Why did you crop the giant out of the picture? Well, I was just handed and told to do this. She didn't even know. She never even saw the real photograph. So that went viral. The the Vieira brothers used that for the end of their show, In Search of the Lost Giants. Look, they were here. They were all over the place. There was a Western expansion. Anytime one is found, boom, it just, the Stasi comes in and arrests everybody and takes all the stuff and off it goes. I mean, we've got quotes from the Smithsonian in the 19th century. I mean, there were a lot of stuff unearthed in the Americas. I believe that there are still skeletons out there to be found. But that's it. That's as close as I've ever gotten was a picture. But at least I discovered the picture.
Okay, perfect. I just want to ask Marzulli, what are his expectations for the next UAPTF report? And what did you think about the first one?
I'll answer the second question first. It was a huge nothing burger, which is what we all expected they would do. Yeah. Just in other words, they gave us 1,000 pages on how cow flatulence can affect the air and the planet. 1,000 pages on cow farts, if I can be so crass. 1,000 pages. UFOs, which changes everything, we get 9 pages. What was interesting is out of the 144, only one they could disprove. So it's just such a cat and mouse game. It's just a typical Texas two-step, as we call it, as I call it. Look, the cat's out of the bag. something is going to break through at some point. I honestly believe that the next phase in disclosure will be movies of the Roswell crash, where they cart some retired general in or some guy from, and they go, look, we lied because we had to. That's the next rung on the ladder of disclosure. First rung being, the New York Times or Washington Times, the whole Commander David Fravor, and then on Hannity, that whole thing. That's the first rung. And then from there, Luis Elizondo, and we've got metal, we've tested the metal isotopes not on this world. That's the third rung. Fourth rung, the Pentagon admits, UAPs are real. So, gee, thanks, guys. The fifth rung, we have vehicles not made on this earth. No one bats an eyelash. It's just like, if they're not made here, then where are they made? And more importantly, who are the characters that are making them? You guys had video of that. And then on and on it goes until the Goofy report, which was totally goofy. So I honestly think they'll trot out somebody and they'll show original footage from Roswell. That's got to be the next step. And we'll see the saucer up close and personal, the debris field, the memory metal, all this stuff, maybe the bodies. Look, I'm one of the few people on the planet that actually talked to Jesse Marcel Jr. I mean, I interviewed him, and I'm proud of that interview. It's in, we used part of it in the film. It's in the books. It's in the book UFO Disclosure, and he handled that. And to think that his father, Marcel Sr., would mistake a weather balloon for, wreckage from another world, I don't think so. I mean, this guy was around weather balloons. Marcel Sr. was around weather balloons every day. I mean, that's what he did. He was the base intelligence officer. So he'd have to be a pretty bad intelligence officer to confuse a weather balloon with a crashed UFO. It's the biggest bunch of hooey ever flown up the flagpole. Classic wag the dog. Classic wag the dog. The bottom line is this. When disclosure happens, it changes everything. Absolutely everything. And the question is this: how much will we see? And right now we're seeing more than we ever thought we'd see. But we're seeing it. They've admitted. For the Pentagon to admit that they have off-world vehicles not made on this earth, I mean, what do you do with a statement like that? Can we see them? No.
Marzulli, you are a popular filmmaker and researcher. I don't know if Francisco will cut this after it, but I'll ask the question anyway. You probably have friends in common with Steven Spielberg, and maybe you heard about a legit Roswell autopsy picture that someone close to Steven Spielberg has. Did you ever heard of that picture? It was mentioned by James Fox about 2 weeks ago.
Well, that would be really interesting if they come out with it. I mean, our work in our Watchers series, and I show it in the free film. It's a free film. UFO Disclosure. You can go to streaming.lamarzulli.net, watch the film for free. And at the end of the film, you will see what I believe is the best UFO footage ever taken by the late Dr. Roger Lear, the Kumburgaz UFO. And you see the two beings, and we show that in the film, and the blow up, and they are the Greys. I mean, that's who's there. The hatches opened up, and I only showed a portion of the 3 hours that Roger took. I mean, he's there for like all night long filming this thing, and different doors or openings would happen and creatures would be there. Just crazy stuff. You see the heat signature, the craft turns like this, then the running lights are on, it moves, it's next to the moon. So it's not photoshopped in any way. I mean, he's showing you the moon and this light next to it, and then he zooms in on the light, and there's the Kumburgaz UFO, the best UFO footage. So I think, stuff is out there. we need to see something like this. Crash, they're not crash test dummies. They're the real deal. They have them. I'll tell you guys a story. I was interviewing a 2-star general from one of the branches of the service. I was trying to get information, but I was also seeing if he would divulge anything, which of course he never would. But I had warmed him up for about 20 minutes with softball questions. What was it like? Is it a retina thing, retina scan? How do you keep people in and out of the base? Just softball questions on security. And then I fire the fastball, the 98-mile-an-hour fastball right over home plate. For those of you who are baseball fans, I'm not. But anyway, I use that analogy. And I asked, this was the question. Without leaning forward, I just kept my same relaxed voice and and he's like slumped back in his chair like this, drinking lemonade, right? With his legs crossed, and he's like, just very, very relaxed. And I said, the question was, what was it like when you saw the retrieved alien bodies from the Roswell 1947 spacecraft? Guy's body language went off the charts. He sits up, he uncrosses one leg, looks around like this, straightens his back, his face gets rigid. I got the 2-star general in front of me on red alert. He looks at me and he just looks at me and he goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I just sat there biting my tongue so I wouldn't be laughing, because in my being an amateur student of body language, it was just like, he just told me everything I need to know. Thank you very much. And I've told that story on Coast to Coast before. There's been no repercussions. The only repercussions, I was contacted and threatened 3 different ways by a goon from the deep state, was our work on the Kandahar giant, which was probably 12 to 14 feet tall, which was killed in the Kandahar province. And we had on our show in the film a shooter, but then we had a second witness who arrived there 2 years after the incident. And that's all everyone was talking about. You weren't allowed to talk about it, but that's all everyone was talking about. And then when they went for cave, this is all in the film. I think it's in Watchers 10. He's in cave training, and he's being told by the instructor, when you're in a cave like this, aim high. He goes, well, why do I aim high? Just trust us. Just aim high. So why are they telling the guys that? He comes on the record. Of course, his face is all pixelated and wearing a hoodie. You can't see him, and disguise his voice and all that kind of stuff. But so we had 2 witnesses. That's why we went with it. We had, because it's one thing to have one guy, but if you have 2 witnesses, that's what you need to really, really go out on with a story. You need to vet it with at least 2 witnesses. So we had 2. And then we also had Steve Quayle's shooter or pilot that flew one of these guys out. And when we got our shooter together with his pilot, we realized 2 different years, 2 different locations, 2 different giants. So now we know there's more than one.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered more or less good part of it. We'll probably have another conversation somewhere in the near future.
I hope so.
It was very, very nice to have you. I cannot thank you enough for everything. The information, the friendship, all the good time that we spent together. Yep. Amazing. And it's always more in our future. Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, and give my best compliments to Peggy as well.
Very nice to meet you.
Okay. See you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Live long and prosper.